Urban Infrastructure. This is Courtney at ISPE headquarters, and just a reminder to everyone that you should have received an email that allowed you to connect to this webinar. In that email was the link to the quiz. So after today's presentation, we'll send out the handouts, and just a reminder that those quizzes need to be completed by Sunday evening. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Adam with our Chicago chapter, who's going to give our welcome and introduce our presenter. Adam?
Thank you, Courtney. Good afternoon, everyone. As Courtney mentioned, my name is Adam Hardy. I'm a vice president of the state chapter. I'm also the local president for Chicago chapter. And I'd like to give you some insight on the organization before the presentation. Most of you attending are members familiar with the benefits and services ISP provides, like this free member webinar and a number of other PDH and networking opportunities such as boot camps, conventions, and other special events. One of these events that's coming up is the new PE and SE license ceremony at the Governor's Mansion in Springfield, Illinois. Additionally, registration is now open for the ISP convention, which will take place on July 10th and 11th in Normal, Illinois. Like this year's convention, we will have a lot of new and exciting and interesting presenters like the Illinois-Indiana Corridor, the 2014 Infrastructure Report Card. We'll have opportunities to mentor young engineers, and a special session on ethics for engineers worth 2 PDHs that will fulfill requirements for Illinois and Wisconsin. Actually, I think I forgot to mention that the Governor's Mansion licensure ceremony is actually on May 15th. That's correct, Courtney?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. ISP plays a vital role in promoting and protecting our profession and licensure by making the value of our educational experience and license is not reduced, and the practice of professional engineering remains sound. As we look to the future, there is an urgency to increase our recruiting efforts more than ever, so the next generation of members can sustain and grow the organization. On the board or on your screens, you should see our statistics. This is one of my favorite statistics. It just shows that there, first of all, it just makes me appreciate the 1,900 professional engineers that do support the organization, and that if you're in that number, you're very, very valuable to us. It also shows us the opportunities to increase our membership to those who we currently serve but have not yet heard the message to join us. So we appreciate all of you that are on the call, all of the members, and we look forward to helping increase that number as the years go on and years to come. To help grow the organization, strengthen our representation in the state, I'm asking all of you to make a personal goal to add one member this year. Just one member, be it a colleague at your company, from another organization, or from your community. Bring one person into the organization will help the ISP membership cause greatly. Please think membership, recruitment, and take this message back to your chapters and work on initiatives or programs that will increase membership and fuel the organization. To those attendees who are not yet members, join ISP. Support your efforts of your colleagues and reap the various benefits that this organization has. By working together, we can ensure ISP remains a strong voice for thousands of Illinois professional engineers. Thank you for listening to my long-winded speech. I will now turn it over to Suzanne Carlson from CDOT, and also Gerardo Garcia, who has joined her today to give us a presentation on complete streets, Chicago design, and sustainable urban infrastructure. With that, I'll hand it over to Suzanne. Please let us know and contact Courtney however you can if there's any technical difficulties as we proceed. Thank you. All right, Suzanne?
Thank you, Adam. This is Suzanne Carlson and Gerardo Garcia with CDOT. And we're going to talk today about our new Complete Streets Chicago Design Guidelines, which is now the law of the land starting last July 1st. We do want to be designing our city roadways to complete street standards, and also the Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Guidelines, which have came out roughly in tandem, where we want to create more resilient, long-lasting infrastructure that supports the environment. So we've had a complete streets policy in the city since 2006 that you see on the board here to accommodate and balance transportation for all users. But what does it mean? We didn't really have it spelled out. What does that mean in terms of roadway design until we came out with the design guidelines in 2012. Why is it important? All the reasons listed here. Better health if we get people walking and bicycling. We find that neighborhood business districts are more vibrant when they're compatible with walking and biking. And these are more and more the areas where people want to buy homes and live. Safety, we are trying to reduce crashes, reduce speeding, and protect life. We also find people are driving less and using other modes more. We've got, we'll talk more about environmental challenges, heat island, and climate change that we want to address, as well as making sure the infrastructure we build today is going to last longer and serve more purposes than how we've thought about it in the past. So here's just a sample. We find that vehicle miles traveled is going down. It went down with the recession, but you'll see that the trend continues, and people continue to drive fewer miles. And at the same time, as cities who invest in other types of infrastructure, they see an increase in, this is just bicycling on the right-hand side here. Cities that have made these investments are finding that bicycle commuting is going up, and we also want to see walking mode share go up as well. So CDOT's goals, and remember there's a quiz at the end, hint, hint, is to eliminate pedestrian crash fatalities in 10 years. We set that out in 2012, so this is by 2022. It's really all traffic fatalities. I'm the pedestrian coordinator, so we're really trying to address pedestrians first as the most vulnerable road users. We want to reduce injury crashes 50% in 5 years, and also increase the amount of commute trips made by walking, biking, transit, and also working from home, which tends to compete with some of these modes. And we're right now at 38%.
So good afternoon, everybody. So you know, all of these goals and a little bit of what Suzanne, or a lot of what Suzanne is going to talk about today, are really part of these this broader umbrella of efforts by the department. And you know, what we're calling it essentially is, or how it's manifesting itself is this kind of three-pronged approach to making great streets for the city of Chicago. Starting with our Complete Streets Guideline, which we're going to talk about today, as well as the Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Guidelines, which we'll touch on also. And then forthcoming, our Placemaking Guideline. And the idea is that the intersection of all of these three design guides will really lend themselves to creating better and safe and sustainable streets for the city of Chicago. And really how we're accomplishing that is through our implementation process. As you can see on the screen here, you know, we're outlining our project delivery process across the board for all three efforts. So, and what that means is that it'll actually be one coordinated project delivery process whereby we're taking into consideration safety and complete streets, as well as sustainability, and then, as I mentioned, forthcoming placemaking to really make a better public way for the city. And it'll boil down to some very project-specific guidance. And in order to do that, we've created a tool that we're kind of beta testing right now at the department. We call it the Project Delivery Notebook. And it's essentially a document that tracks our project delivery process and provides guidance for step-by-step decision-making. You know, it also ensures oversight by the compliance committee. But you know, the thing to take away from this is that while we do have a compliance committee, and while we are setting forth requirements for projects, the process itself does allow for variances, and also allows for projects to deal with kind of existing conditions through those variances as well. Another part of that project delivery notebook is what we're calling this summary sheet. And this is all currently in its beta phase in an Excel file. The long-term goal is to have some kind of internal web-based database that either CDOT project managers or consultants doing design work for us, and even consultants doing and contractors doing construction work for us could access remotely. But the idea is that in a snapshot, we can get a feel for where a project is at. It'll also track a chain of ownership between design, construction, even before that when you're in planning and scoping of a project. So as the project moves kind of panned within the department, we're able to see where it's at and how it's been progressing.
So for firms that have CDOT jobs, you might see in RFPs we're talking about you have to meet complete street goals, and this is the tool that your project manager will hand you and work with you to provide some guidance during the project delivery process. Getting into the content of what it means to design complete streets, the Complete Streets Design Guide at the very end will give you our website so you can go and access the guide online. It's organized into modal hierarchy, typology, design values, and procedures. So this is really the crux of it. We are now designing our streets with the pedestrian in mind first, and then transit users, or transit vehicles and users, bicyclists, and then automobiles. So that's really a flip of what we've been doing for 50 to 100 years, where we've thought about the automobile, the speed, the turning radius first, and then let everybody else kind of borrow the street. We're really trying to make it so we accommodate our most vulnerable users first. This doesn't mean that we're designing pedestrian-only streets or bicycle-only streets. It means that when you're making choices between the modes, you're going to optimize for pedestrians first. So again, thinking of turning radius, you're not necessarily going to optimize for a semi first. You're going to think about how that pedestrian, how the family with a child is going to cross that street safely first. So what does it look like? This is not my favorite complete street because I find that it's still pretty wide and we're kind of retrofitting a pretty big, pretty fast street. But you'll see that we've included a lot of complete streets element. You've got bike lanes there. You've got decorative crosswalks. We also use the continental stripes, which is more high visibility. You have pedestrian refuge islands for someone, and it happened to me the other day, who gets stuck halfway across and has to wait for the next light cycle. You can see there's transit in the picture, taxis, infiltrating planters, so we're also addressing stormwater, and then it's more attractive than it used to be. So there's a few important things about complete streets. It's not that you will always have all these elements as shown here in every single project you do, but you're going to think through your project and make a lot of choices during the design based on complete streets principles. So we're really building a lot of things up front in the process, and a lot of you may be doing this already, looking at crash history before you even scope your project. So trying to find out where the conflict points are, what are issues of concern, and where you can make some improvements, and how the crashes happen. Are they turning crashes, straight ahead crashes, rear end, what's going on the street? Putting those planners to work and starting to use some of the neighborhood plans and transportation plans that have already been developed. Environmental conditions, it's going to be important what kind of soil you have, how much water you can infiltrate. If you've got flooding issues that you can solve in your design, addressing urban heat islands, and can you add to public space? So a lot of times there's spots in the roadway where the lane doesn't continue, or there's just a car never reaches that corner, and you can turn that into more public space or pedestrian space. It's also important to get out there and see who's using the road and how. Where are the bus stops? Is there a hospital there that people are going to? Do they always cross in the middle of the street? There's ways to address that in your design. This is an example of a crash map we did for a project at the Kimball Lawrence transit station. Our project footprint is an eighth of a mile around the transit station, so we mapped pedestrian and bicycle crashes. This is specifically a walk-to-transit project, so we didn't really look at the automobile crash patterns in this map. We were mostly concerned with what pedestrians were doing, and then we tried to address the hot spots during the design. Another thing that's different about Complete Street compared to previous processes is what you're looking at in the built environment. We're starting to look at building form and function and roadway form and function, not just what type of streets you have, how many lanes, and how fast everyone go, and what is the level of service. We want to start looking at the land use, what type of businesses are there, what's the regulatory zoning, what type of zoning does it have, and also into the roadway form and function, what's the character of the roadway, who's using it and how, what's parking like, what do traffic operations look like, looking at intersections and conflict points, and also any special designations such as snow routes, pedestrian streets, and whether it's in our Streets Recycling 2020 plan. I gave you the page reference numbers here so you can dig into this a little bit more, but just quickly, our building form and function typologies are residential, mixed use, downtown, commercial centers, institutional or campus, industrial, and parks and open space. We don't have a master map of this. This is really at the discretion of project managers and the design team. I find that when you get into Google Maps and Street View, you can assess this pretty readily. And it's not an exact science, but you should be able to tell what the predominant use of your project is. And it may change, 2 blocks with one type of thing and 3 blocks with another. Same idea with roadway form and function. We've got thoroughfares like Western Avenue, which is really those cross-town routes. Connectors where people are going from one neighborhood to maybe the next neighborhood over. Main streets, we've got Peoria in the picture. I think Clark Street and Lincoln are also good examples where there's a lot of local businesses. Neighborhood streets, service ways, which is mostly alleys, and then also pedestrian exclusive rights of way. Intersections and crossings, same idea. I won't talk all the way through this, but you can find these on page 44 to 50.
So just like the Complete Streets Guideline has its structure, the Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Guideline has a structure as well. And it starts out obviously with our mission and purpose statement, and then quickly goes into what we're calling 8 environmental categories. And we'll get into in a little bit of what those categories are. But for each of those categories, then through our task force, which consisted of both staff from various sister agencies, as well as various consultants and people from the industry, we set objectives for those categories, and they were ranked based on what that task force felt were priorities for the city of Chicago. And again, I'll get into some concrete examples of those in a little bit. And then in order to meet those objectives, we set some requirements. And these are very specific actions or activities that can be done in a project, both during design and during construction, in order to meet some of the objectives and requirements or objectives for sustainability. And then we also provide a series of strategies, and these will be clearly outlined in Volume 2, which is forthcoming this summer. But the strategies in Volume 2 are essentially a toolkit for how to meet all of the objectives and requirements that each project necessitates. And the big thing to take away from both Complete Streets and Sustainable Infrastructure Guidelines, or SUIG for short, is that not every project has to do everything. If you open up the guides, you'll see a lot of requirements and a lot of design guidance. But we also do, for both documents, we made a very conscious decision to kind of edit and determine what was appropriate for what project type based on size and budget. So again, here's some of the categories and objectives. There are 8 categories. These are the first 4. Economics, water, materials, and waste. And then underneath those, you'll see the objectives. And again, these are prioritized based on what the department and the task force felt were priorities for the city of Chicago. So for example, number 1 under water is reduce basement and street flooding. Similarly, in materials and waste, number 1 is maximize construction waste reduction and recycling of construction waste. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see the next 4 categories: urban ecology, climate and air quality, beauty and community, and commissioning. And for example, in climate and air quality, the number 1 objective is reduce urban heat island effect. And there are a number of requirements on how we can to help us achieve that goal. And then there are also a number of strategies. So sometimes these are synergistic. If you implement one strategy, you may very well be meeting an objective in multiple categories.
So jumping back to Complete Streets design principles, we're going to talk about modal hierarchy, design trees, cross-sections, intersections, and some of the geometric and operational policies. These are all laid out in the design guide, and I'll just cover some of what you'll find in the next couple slides. So the cross-section elements, in the old days, we probably thought more about the vehicle realm. So that area where you've got your bus lanes, travel lanes, and bicycle lanes may have been the real focus of a roadway project. But there's so much that happens in what we're now calling the interstitial area and the pedestrian realm that really make complete streets. So we've laid out different options and different things to think about as you're constructing and designing projects. If you've been doing streetscape projects for CDOT for a while, you've probably thought about that and looked at a lot of these elements already. So we're really just building it out and then looking more at the median also. There's a lot you can do with the median that may be ignored at this time. So getting into specific design guidance, this is Appendix A to the design guide. We talked about the modal hierarchy. So the default is the pedestrian, transit, bike, and then auto at the top there. I should mention, Gerardo talked about the compliance committee. This doesn't mean that every project will always be this way. You can go to the compliance committee to get a variance. If you have a bus rapid transit project, if you have a bicycle spoke route on your route, those are probably the main ones. You may want to optimize for transit and bicycle respectively for those types of projects, and you would run that by the compliance committee. If you don't have a compelling reason, then you're going to go with that default hierarchy. Again, we talked about building form and function. So for this example, let's say we've got mixed-use type of buildings in our project, and then our roadway is more of a connector, so something like, let's say, Clark Street. Clark Street project would fit well within this. That brings you to a cross-section for P for pedestrian, M for mixed use, and CN for your connector. And then we've got a bunch of sample cross-sections laid out, which will give you some ideas about what you might put where and what you might add to your project. We don't really have sustainable elements here, but I think you can start to think, okay, you've got your furniture curb zone where you might do some infiltration, and you've got some bike lanes where maybe you can do permeable pavers. I guess I'm kind of thinking big and expensive here for just a minute, but it doesn't hurt to dream.
And the sustainable infrastructure guidelines also have similar illustrative cross-sections that kind of show how you would embed sustainability into this right-of-way, to the right-of-way.
So getting down into the nuts and bolts, and I'm not an engineer, so I get out of my element quickly with this, but we've got a lot of specific policy guidance around all these issues. We're really trying to move away from level of service as a measure of whether our roads work or not. Because again, if you're trying to accommodate your pedestrians and maybe doing something like a leading pedestrian interval where the pedestrian's going to jump on traffic, you're going to have to change your signal timing. There's only so many seconds in the world, and you may not have your vehicles going through with as much timing as they have before, and you have to balance these. Right turn on red, again, if no one turns, it's better for the pedestrians if they don't have these cars coming at them. So there's a lot of appropriate places where we might add a eliminate the right turn on red. Design and control vehicles, I'm finding is really important. Again, back to what I mentioned before with the semi, are you designing a corner so that a semi can turn? Let's say we're still in our Clark Street example, maybe we're at Clark and Belmont. Are we going to optimize that corner for a semi, or are we going to optimize it for more like a FedEx truck? We've changed our design vehicle to O2, which, as I understand it, is more of a FedEx-sized vehicle. Again, you want to rely on your roadway observations and find out who's using the street. If you are on a street, now let's say Central Avenue or Cicero, you have a lot of trucks, and you may have to design a little differently in those situations. We're also looking at design speed, so not designing to how people are using the roadway today, but how do we want them to be, how fast do we want people to be going, which is, frankly, the speed limit. The most important thing we can do to reduce deaths is slow down vehicles. The more slowly the vehicle's going, the less chance there is that vulnerable road user who may be hit by that vehicle will die. Lane widths are also important to that, bringing down speeds by bringing down the lane width. And that also you will find is where you get your trade-offs. If you can narrow down your lane width, you can accommodate that interstitial area, the bike lanes, the pedestrian right-of-way a lot better. And you can also shorten your crossing distances. So some of the principles we're looking at, and I kind of got into this a little bit, is making intersections simpler, trying to eliminate some of the approaches if possible. Making them smaller, so bumping out corners where you can, and that's tricky when you have bus stops. Where you have no bus stops, you may be able to bump out quite a few corners. Shortens your crossing lengths and gives pedestrians better visibility when they can get out into the roadway a little bit. while protected on that bump out. Aligning lanes, squaring off intersections, managing speeds, thinking about how buses and cyclists are going to deal with each other at the corners. That's kind of a tricky emerging field. I think we're coming up with more and more strategies about how to do that. Talked a little bit about prioritizing signals for pedestrians, looking at your timing, giving that leading section interval if you have a chance to, and making sure you have enough crossing time. If you're near a senior center or hospital, we do want to slow down the crossing time a bit to make sure that a common road user in that area will be able to get across. And I mentioned this before, there's kind of this new field, I don't know if it's really a field, but when we have so much snow on the ground forever this winter, you could see areas where a car never went. You could see like a one-way street intersecting a one-way street, and then there's a patch of snow that sits there for 2 months that never has a car track over it. So starting to think about some of those areas that could be used differently that aren't being used for vehicles, even though they're part of an intersection or a roadway. If you look at this picture, this is a pretty wide road, but there's so much going on with it that I think you would be inclined to drive maybe 25 miles an hour rather than 40 or 50 on this road. You've got the parked cars. You've got, I think maybe accidentally, but you've got 2 different colors going on there, which kind of implies a bike lane. And then you've got a lot of street trees that really narrow your line of sight and would encourage a driver to drive more slowly. So think about adding some of these things in. I'm not crazy about parking as a pedestrian advocate, but it really does make the pedestrian environment safer because in this picture, the pedestrians are inside those parked cars and they're inside the trees and the parkway. You can't even see in this picture where the pedestrian is. So your vehicle is going to be much less likely to get over to where the pedestrian is, except at the intersection. Terminating vistas, you can't really see forever in this picture. These are all elements that will help bring down speed. So we're going to kind of shift topics a little bit. This is really how you're designing your project. Remember, we're tracking all this in that Complete Streets notebook. And part of that is for you to understand what kind of data you brought to the table, what kind of crash data, and how you're designing your road, and then getting ready for a handoff to the construction team. That's particularly important around sustainable principles because we need to show the construction team how you design the road and why you made some of the choices that you made. So we'll get into how we might document that.
So in this integrated project delivery process, essentially, you know, the documentation of data and the creation of tools for data collection during and post-construction are just as important as the actual design process, and collectively are integrated into the project delivery process. So as part of the Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Guideline, there are some documentation reports that will be required as part of this design process. Some of these include stormwater pollution prevention plans. And again, you may be familiar with some of these in different contexts, or you probably all are familiar with these in different contexts. But these are, again, more suited to what the department is trying to achieve from a sustainability point of view within a kind of dense urban condition. So, you know, a big one is a construction waste management plan, figuring out how much waste is going to be diverted from a landfill, as well as also figuring out part of that is how much recycled content your project is going to be using. And traffic management plan, again, these are all things that maybe as design consultants you all are already working on and preparing for the department. But again, taking a more holistic approach to these, you know, Suzanne just mentioned, through that modal hierarchy and providing bike and ped access through construction zones is something that those documents are kind of outlining as part of the construction process as well. And again, these are tools that are created during the design process for the construction process. So there's a little bit more integration in that. And again, a little bit of more of a chain of ownership from one process to the other, as, you know, aside from just kind of putting a plan set together. And a lot of what the data collection that will be collected during the project delivery process can kind of be can be divided into two categories. One is really quantifying assets, and it's really a list of outputs of how many pedestrian refuge items did your project install, how many miles of protected bike lanes, and really just a count of what exactly your project holds. And that's twofold. One, it's good for tracking for the department to understand how much of this new technology or how much of these new elements we're installing. But also, it helps down the line with our maintenance programs and understanding what a project has within it within our databases. The other data collection effort is really more as we're talking about measuring success, and these are all performance metrics that would require monitoring. Now, again, as we mentioned earlier, different project types require different levels of requirements. So a lot of the monitoring would come into play with a larger project where you're actually figuring out how much how much stormwater your project is diverting from the storm sewer, and figuring out whether your BMPs are working the way that you designed them, as well as on the complete streets and the safety side of things, tracking reduction of crashes over time. So we're not just building a project anymore and letting it be. We're actually commissioning it and understanding and fine-tuning over the life of it. Which leads to this slide. And again, even as part of this kind of integrated approach, commissioning and construction become a little more prevalent during design, and having to think about those and plan for those. And so that's really what the takeaway is today, is that as we're going through the project delivery process, as designers and consultants, or even as in-house CDOT project managers, we have to start planning for commissioning and for construction in a different way early on in the process. And there will be some impacts to typical construction practices that designers need to be cognizant of during the design process. Construction sequencing, particularly when you're talking about stormwater BMPs, and protecting either existing ones or future ones, is going to be really critical in order to ensure that when those are built, they're built in a way that allows them to function and maximize their function. And again, taking into consideration and doing a little bit more research on regional materials and figuring out where your contractor can actually get all of the components for their light pole in order for them to be able to meet their goals as they're building the project. Again, we talked about construction waste management and really all of the documentation that's gonna become a part of this process, preparing that for the construction process.
Now we'll get into a little lighter material, just looking at some pictures and seeing how this hits the road. This is one of our earlier complete streets projects. It was an opportunity we had during our arterial resurfacing, where we knew that South Chicago was a pedestrian crash corridor, but we didn't have any projects set aside to make it better. It came up in the arterial resurfacing project, and we got a little ahead of the game and did a new striping plan to narrow the roadway, to do a road diet, and install a bike lane. This didn't come out of streets recycling. This wasn't because there was necessarily the demand at this time for bicycling on South Chicago, but it was a way to eat up the roadway, if you will. So we put in a generous center median, created one travel lane, and a little more consistency so the vehicle knows where to be, and then striped out the bike lane on the outside. So you've got, again, a lot more distance between your vehicle and your pedestrian. As you can see on the right-hand side there, that woman getting out of her car is probably 8 feet away, we hope, from where an automobile should be. We want to go back through here and concrete it up, so put in pedestrian refuge islands in the middle. Maybe someday we'll have flexible delineators around the bike lane, something like that. We got some pushback from the community once this went in. Everyone thought it was really for bicycling, and why are you putting bicycle lanes here? We don't have strong bicycle community in this area. And we really had to talk up that it was meant to be pedestrian improvements and reduce pedestrian crashes in the corridor. Here's another good example that we're probably all familiar with. Dearborn Street had about 8,000 vehicles coming through in a day, and yet it had three plus lanes, 4 lanes for automobile traffic. It was really more than was necessary for what we saw on that street. We had a great opportunity to put in not 1 but 2 bike lanes, so counterflow, people are going both ways in the bike lane, and then protecting that with parked cars. I think over time people have gotten it, they figured out to park in that middle area and not in the bike lane most of the time. And if you look at the beginning photo, you see there's a bicyclist kind of struggling to figure out where he's supposed to be there. You've got a delivery truck kind of making use of what's supposed to be a bus lane, and just kind of cars spread out around the street. And you can see now that the bicyclists are going to be protected from automobile traffic, and you've got a little bit more comfortable sidewalk because of those extra lanes. I should also mention that this is cheap, right? We just went in and restriped it and then put in some bollards. So we were looking, I think, for some low-hanging fruit and ways to increase bicycle infrastructure and get complete streets. It doesn't always have to be expensive. Talk about one?
Sure. Lawrence is another example of a very wide roadway with very long crossing distance for pedestrians. Of course, we do have a shared bike lane, but really a lot of capacity for arguably not a lot of use. And this project is under construction, but what we're hoping it'll look like soon is a little bit more like this, reducing one of those lanes, the roadway to a lane, adding a pedestrian refuge island to shorten that crossing distance and provide some refuge in between, adding a dedicated bike lane, and then as you see on the right, the bump out does 2 things. It's actually providing green infrastructure as an infiltration planner, while also contributing to that shortened pedestrian crossing. And this is another project that, again, blends complete streets and sustainability very well. It's actually the Pilsen Blue Island Sustainable Streetscape. These are some existing condition photos. It's a very wide mix of industrial and residential and commercial uses. There's a school in this corridor, a high school. You can see kids were kind of walking along railroad tracks to get to school. Cars were parked on the sidewalk, and in general, even because the sidewalks were very wide, and there really weren't any bike or friendly bike facilities before. And this is a little diagram of the proposed cross-section. For this project, rarely happens, but it actually made sense to shorten the sidewalk. The sidewalk was plenty wide as it was, and so we've got a shorter sidewalk which keeps industrial vehicles and cars from parking on the sidewalk. Added infiltration planters, new trees, high white light essentially, and added a biking lane. By shortening the sidewalk length, we were actually able to add a bike lane alongside the parking lane, and both of those actually sit on top of a permeable paver. So we're getting a lot of infiltration, and then photocatalytic pavement overlay on top of some of the pavement areas as well, to kind of help with urban heat island and smog. And really quickly, these are some after pictures. You see, infiltration planners, nice sidewalks, education. We did those solar and wind-powered LED pedestrian lights, which also have educational panels. So they're telling people what it is that this infrastructure is doing, how it's working. We work with the adjacent high school to build this bioswale and coordinate our efforts, and they also have a very large permeable paver field. So that's another aspect of sustainability that's very important to the department, is actually coordinated efforts and being synergistic with how things are built and maximizing the city's investment in the neighborhoods.
So with that, thank you, everyone. Here's our website where we've got all these documents. I think there's ChicagoCompleteStreets.org, and and I believe there's a category called Guidelines and Documents where you will find all these documents.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne and Gerardo. Courtney, if you're on the call, is there a mechanism for us to take questions? Or?
Yeah. If there are any questions, if you could please go ahead and type those into the question box on your GoToWebinar screen that pops up. And then if you have any questions in the room, Adam, go ahead and field those while people are typing.
Do you guys have any questions down there?
Okay, I do have a question. It says, I missed which projects are required to follow Complete Streets design.
All of them. There are some that are tricky to follow the process we laid out. For example, we have a group that spends menu fund. They'll do small things like speed humps. And we're trying to think, like, how do you send them through a whole Complete Streets process when they're just trying to put 400 speed bumps out in a given year? But I think when you have something like a streetscape or a redesign or major roadway reconstruction, you can really get your head around it. The slide we showed way back at the beginning that just looked like an Excel spreadsheet, we do have different requirements for different categories. So if you put in that you're doing an ADA project versus a major reconstruction versus a bridge project, you will follow different steps. You don't necessarily have to do a crash map. If you're doing an ADA project, you're going to be able to skip a lot of steps. And then same thing goes for sustainable guidelines. If you're doing a much simpler project, you're just restriping, you're not going to have to do stormwater because you're not touching stormwater anyway.
I have another question. Will you use a 5-second pedestrian crossing for all traffic stops?
I'm not sure where the 5 second comes from. We do a 3.5 foot per second as a standard crossing timing, and then we slow that down to 3 feet per second where we have seniors and disabled populations. And then where we do a leading pedestrian at interval, we give the pedestrian a 3-second jump on the rest of car traffic. If I didn't answer the question, send a follow-up.
Okay. The next question is if you could reiterate the goals for pedestrian crash fatalities in 2022.
Did someone take a look at the questions already?
They're asking the question.
I don't remember. It's 10 years. We have 10 years, and we started in 2012. So the goal is by 2022 to have 0 pedestrian fatalities.
The next question is more of a statement. The presentation is wonderful. Will it be available on the website or otherwise? So this may be more of a question for me. When Suzanne sends me the presentation, if she can do that, I will email it out to all participants. If that's okay with you, Suzanne.
Absolutely, yeah. We can put it on that Complete Streets website as well, so you can get the Cliff Notes version of our design guidelines.
Fantastic. The next question is, what is the percentage of variances that you issue?
We haven't gotten that far yet, actually. Most of our projects are in fairly early design that are following the Complete Streets design guidelines. So no one's really come to our compliance committee yet with a formal variance request. Although I do find when you're sitting in a room trying to knock out your design, you're kind of working through those issues the whole time. You're saying, well, okay, you don't want to do a refuge island because you want to have enough, you want to have a 12-foot travel lane or something. You're kind of having that conversation in person, like, well, remember, you do have to put the pedestrian first, and maybe you can narrow up your travel lane to put in your pedestrian refuge island. But nobody's yet come with a formal request for something different.
Okay. I think the 5-second question, there was a follow-up to that regarding where the traffic, including bikes, stop in all ways and pedestrians can cross in any direction.
Oh, okay. We only have one location now where that happens, the all-way cross at State and Jackson. I'm not an engineer, so I cannot rattle off what the timings are. But we do have audible signals and using cross diagonally. That was a pilot project, and we're reevaluating how it works. There's actually some concerns from the disabled community about not knowing when that diagonal is operational because it's not every pedestrian cycle that gets the diagonal cross. So we're trying to see if we can resolve those concerns before rolling that out further. But as far as what all the timings are, I know it's complicated and not not something I can really address.
Okay, thank you. The questions keep rolling in. There is, let's see, are new complete street designs immune to potholes? Weather really destroys our streets. Will we have increased maintenance costs over time?
I'm sorry, what was the question? What was the comment?
The comment is, weather really destroys our streets. Will we have increased maintenance costs over time?
Oh, okay. Where we're going with sustainable urban infrastructure is to reduce maintenance costs. So if you have a street that's infiltrating, you have some maintenance where you have to get the debris out of the infiltrating parts, but hopefully over time you'll have fewer potholes because you don't have that same expansion and contraction, or rather the expansion and contraction is accommodated with the porous part of the roadway. Gerardo, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd say that about it. I don't know that any road is immune to potholes, but with a lot of the pilot projects that we've done, particularly the Green Alleys program, we found that the infiltrating nature of the roadway does help with freestyle actually, and a lot of that has to do with how it's designed in the cross section of the pavement.
I will say that what's happening this year is there's obviously a lot of interest and concern about potholes and the status of our roadways. We may get less dollars going towards some of the more expensive complete street improvements because we're wanting to resurface more roadways. So, some years are kind of triage. You have to get out there and do the basics, and then some years you may have extra funds to try to do more complete street approaches. We still will be meeting those requirements, but the project might shift a little bit.
Okay. The next question is, can speed control cameras be used effectively at pedestrian intersections?
Absolutely. Yeah, we are finding that the speed cameras are bringing down speeds quite a bit. I wish I had some data to share, but I've seen the graph, and when we put new speed cameras online, we see an increase in incidences, which is the number of cars that are violating the speed limit, and then it drops. So once people start getting those love letters in the mail, as people always call them to me, those warning letters for speeding, they change their behavior and they slow down going through those areas. We put more speed cameras online, we see more speeding, being ticketed, or rather the warnings going out, and then it drops off again. I've met with a couple schools we're working with, and they say, it's really helping. People are not jamming through here anymore. And then the principal will say, but I wish I could because I used to, there's competing interests. They're usually mid-block. They're not at the intersection, but it does traffic calm throughout corridors. I'll also mention quickly, back to the data approach that we're really shifting to, we put those in high crash locations. So we ranked all of our safety zones based on crashes, particularly youth crashes, because the purpose of the program is to get kids safely to schools and parks. So anytime you're going by that speed camera, just know that it's there for a reason.
All right. The next question is this program something that the City of Chicago decided to do independently, or is it a federal mandate?
We did receive some state and federal funding, I believe, for the development of the design guidelines. If I'm not mistaken, both complete streets and sustainable infrastructure guidelines. But I wouldn't say it was a mandate. I don't believe there is one in place to do this.
Yeah, we had funding from the Centers for Disease Control, interestingly enough, because they're recognizing that people will be fitter over time if they're using, if we have complete streets, and then there also will be less injuries from crashes. There's also a movement across the country that more and more communities have created complete streets policies, and more communities also have what we call 0 and 10, the 0 fatalities in 10 years, other people call Vision 0. New York just announced it, LA has announced it. I can only think of our 3 top cities. Just kidding. But yeah, so you'll see there's more of a move in this direction, but none of this is being mandated.
Okay. Which that kind of leads into the next question is whether or not Chicago is looking at other sustainable projects in other towns, and which ones, which may be more of a, are you helping or looking to collaborate with other communities?
The Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Guidelines, the funding that we received for that actually mandated that the document be able to be used regionally. So while the the document was put together very much through that lens of what makes sense for the city of Chicago and the region, so it's our expectation that other municipalities in the area can also use this as a tool to implement sustainable infrastructure. The other thing that we did while developing the guidelines was that we did a lot of kind of analysis of existing kind of guidelines and rating systems, and there are quite a few out there. And again, through the lens of what makes sense for the city and the region, we kind of borrowed or used some of the same or similar methodologies that a lot of the rating systems and the guidance within the other rating systems nationally.
And there's definitely some street treatments where we're looking to other cities that have rolled something out that might be a little more experimental to figure out how they did it. One example is some cities are painting out, where I talked about those areas where the snow covers it and no vehicle ever goes there. Some people are doing cheap, let's say low cost, changes to the roadway where they're painting that out and maybe putting bollards around it before they can get the dollars online to do it in concrete. And so we're looking towards other cities that have done that to figure out how they get approval to do those types of treatments.
Okay. And then the last question, what are requirements for manually controlled signal crossing lights, flashing and or red-green lights at pedestrian crossings, for example, the State Street north of the River Bridge? If that's something you can answer.
I cannot answer that.
Okay. All right. Well, those are the questions. Unless you had any in the room.
We don't have any in the room.
Okay. Then I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. Suzanne, thank you so much for presenting. Everyone who is involved in Chicago today, thank you very much for your involvement and for presenting. And everyone who's listening, thank you very much for participating in this month's webinar. We are finalizing presenters for next month, and so that information will go out here in the next week or so. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me. And just a reminder that your quizzes are due by Sunday night. Thank you from here in Springfield, and on behalf of ISPE, thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.